said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go to hell.
Thank you, Amanda. And just some light words from Jesus there on a Sunday morning in February. No big deal. Who picked this series? Gosh. Well, hey, good morning. My name is Justin. If I haven't gotten a chance to meet you yet, it's really great to have you here this morning. Most of you probably, if you're familiar with our community, if you've been here for a little while, you might have picked up somewhere along the way that we're currently in a series through I think generally people agree that this is the most famous set of Jesus' teachings. Throughout the Gospels, it's sort of the vignette of his earthly ministry in a lot of ways, and that's the Sermon on the Mount. And we've decided, I think it's been going really well. Maybe today we'll change that, but I think we've decided to extend the series. We were originally going to do this series for about 8 or 9 weeks leading up to Easter, which if you didn't know that's coming your way in about 8 weeks or so, 7 weeks maybe now. That's your public service announcement right there, just so you know. Some of you really needed to hear that this morning. Good weather is on the way. I should say different weather. I mean, right? We live in New England. This is winter, right? But hopefully you've been able to kind of gather some information for where we've been. And I would just, again, say, if you need to get caught up or you want to go back and listen, all of our stuff lives online, and I just encourage you to do that. But it's been a really eye-opening few weeks. We're on week 5 today. And for me, I feel like I'm relearning all over again and in a different way, just the things of the Lord, like the things of Jesus. And it's just been really encouraging to me, and so hopefully that's been the case for you. But where we've left off is in Matthew chapter 5. And I'd encourage you to turn there with me this morning. If you've got a paper Bible or a phone, we'll also have it up on the screen as we follow along. But Matthew chapter 5 is where we're going to spend our time. And if you remember, we've left off at a specific spot where Jesus is going to use a phrase over and over again. In fact, he does 6 times. He says this phrase, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." You have heard it said, but I say to you. And he's going to do that over and over again. And Jesus, you got to know that Jesus is addressing a certain group of people. He's speaking to what we learned early on in this chapter are a people called the Beatitudes. The people that have gathered on this hillside to listen to Jesus. They are the social outcasts of society. They are the people that don't have it all together. They're sort of like the low caste in the society that they lived in. And here's Jesus gathering these people, and he says that the kingdom that he is building and bringing in himself is being given to them. And they're not only being given to them, but they're being called to help bring the kingdom about in the world by the way in which they live and act and are. And so Jesus is speaking to these people, continuing his thought. And what I found interesting this week is it's not as if Jesus is sharing something with the Beatitudes that they didn't already know. Like the people that he's speaking to, because they lived in a first century context, they grew up hearing the Old Testament law or the Torah. And so they were familiar with these commands and also the 600 other commands that are found in the Old Testament law. And so when Jesus says this phrase, "You have heard it said, but I say to you," he is referring to something that his audience would have known their entire life. They grew up with this. They built festivals around the Old Testament law. Their way of life was caught up in a system, and it was just like second nature. It was like riding a bike to them. It's important to note that Jesus, as we said at the beginning, he's not adding a corrective to the Old Testament. Really important for us to key in on that fact. Jesus is not bringing a new truth out of the Old Testament law, but he is illuminating for them a truth that is there that they are not rightly interpreting. They're not rightly seeing. And the Pharisees and the scribes were famous. They're the ones that you always hear about, like they kept the law. They were the ones that were doing it right. And all along, we find that they weren't, because they were more interested in keeping the letter of the law than they were about the heart and the spirit of the law. And Jesus here is not lowering the bar when he goes into these 6 areas, often referred to as Jesus' ethical teachings. We're sort of looking at that coming up here. He's not lowering the bar here. He is actually raising the bar for these people and for us. And so as we've seen so far, he's not just addressing behavior, which is really easy to do. That's what the Pharisees were really worried about. What do I look like? Am I doing it right? Have I checked the box? Jesus is going beyond behavior, and he's going to something that matters. He's going to the heart. It's almost as if he's acknowledging that you can have all the right behavior, and if your heart hasn't been changed, then the motivation for that behavior is based in performance. And it's not based in the gospel. Before we dive into what Jesus is saying, particularly in this passage this morning, I want to just acknowledge something in the room this morning, and that is this: here at River Valley, we believe God is building something incredible. Like we feel like we're getting a front row seat to some incredible things that he has for us here and now, but also into our future. And I'm really thankful for that. I'm really thankful for the story that he is writing. I'm thankful for you being here. And one of the things that we have really tried to do a good job with here at River Valley Church is to make our gatherings and especially like our community a place where no matter where you're at in your life, no matter where you come from, church background or none, agnostic or atheist, long-seasoned Christian or brand new believer, that you would feel welcome here. Just at the ground level. That you would feel welcome here when you come in, and I hope you feel that way. But in doing so, what we also are aware of is that we gather multiple groups of people that call River Valley Church their community. One group in particular, I would say, I would identify them as Christians. They're followers of Jesus. They're the ones that have said, I'm all in, and let's dive deep into the heart of what Jesus is saying so that we can live into this way of life. Another group might say, well, I'm curious, but I'm also exploring, and in part, I'm not sure. So we're thankful for those people that are in that category. Another group of you might be here today because somehow church still feels like some part of nostalgia for you. Like it still makes you feel like home. And so even if faith is complicated, you found yourself here with us. And finally, another group, and there's probably more, but these are the ones I was thinking about this week. Another group of you might only be here today because a friend invited you and you didn't want to offend them, so here you are. Or you are literally in this room today and you got dragged here against your will and you don't want to be here at all. Hey, you know what? As I said before, River Valley Church will always be the type of place where any of people in those categories and beyond are welcome. And I'm thankful for that. One thing I want to say before we look at a more difficult topic from Jesus this morning around the theme of sex and sexuality is that if you're here today and you wouldn't call yourself a Christian, I want to just remind you and those who are here in the room that when we first started the series out, we saw that Jesus was very specifically speaking to those people that would claim to be followers of him. The Beatitudes are followers of Jesus. Jesus is about to give his ethical teachings, and we're going to be rolling them out in the next few weeks. Friends, it's not going to get any easier here, and we're just starting right out this morning. Wow, okay, here we go. I promise you, it's not going to get easier, but I want you to be aware of the fact that Jesus is giving these teachings to people whose hearts and lives have been changed already. That's very important. It's very important to know that Jesus is speaking to the people who are Christians. And so if you're in the room today, and like I said, you're still trying to figure this out, maybe you're unsure, maybe you're antagonistic towards Jesus and the gospel, I want to just encourage you to just overhear what Jesus is saying to us this morning. Does that make sense? In fact, if you're here not as a follower of Jesus, if you're unsure this morning about faith and Jesus and what's this all about, you're still trying to figure it all out, I would say to you that the most important thing that you need to be concerned with right now is not the ethical teachings of Jesus or the behavior stuff that he's about to get into. What's the most important thing for you is wrestling with the claim that Jesus makes about himself when he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father except through me. That is the number one priority that you should be aiming towards as somebody who's on this exploration journey. And so I just want to encourage you to think about that and also just to be with us and overhear what he's saying. Once you get that settled, once someone is all in and they say yes to the Lord and they give their life, and then all of their life comes under the umbrella of the lordship of Jesus. Everything, every part of their life begins to come under this new way of living, this new way of thinking. And we're going to start to see that this morning. And so that's exactly what the Beatitudes, this group of people, are all about. A new kind of people that Jesus is calling to himself, living a brand new kind of life, in a life that doesn't necessarily make sense to the people around them. And that works in both contexts, by the way, back then and also today. Okay, I told you it was going to be an interesting morning. Gotta love those slate roofs. The Beatitudes were a new kind of people, living a new life and living into a new kingdom that Jesus was setting up for them. That said, Jesus still makes all of us uncomfortable, Christian or not. And so that's what I appreciate about him. He's not the type of person to just be all feel good, make you feel great about everything in your life all the time as if you're the center of your own life. But actually it gives us a recognition of his grace in the need that we have in our own life. So verse 27, it says, you have heard it said, or you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. Right off the bat, does anybody that hears that or reads that, does anybody know where this comes from? Anyone want to take a stab at it? This is not new. Jesus is not giving a new idea here. The 10 Commandments. Yes, I heard somebody say it. So you've got to think, okay, first century person, 2,000 years before Jesus came on the scene, and he's giving this conversation to the Beatitudes, 2,000 years prior, we have the activity of Moses, right? We have the burning bush, we have Mount Sinai, and we have the law, the Old Testament law found in Exodus chapter 20. And this happens to be, I believe it's the 7th command in the 10 commandments, the famous ones, the ones that people put on plaques and still put up in civil halls, and the magistrates know about, and it comes under fire all the time in our country and society. But this is where it comes from. And Jesus he's giving a nod to what they've always known. Thou shalt not commit adultery. And it's interesting, then he goes to say, but I say to you. And this is where Jesus doesn't let anybody off the hook. See, it's easy for us to think to ourselves, okay, well, maybe that's not me. I got that down. We did this last week with anger. If you were here, you're going to realize that Jesus is in a pattern right now. And he basically said last week as we got together and we looked at anger, he compared it to murder, right? He said, you have heard it said, thou shalt not murder. And then he goes further. And he compares murder not to just the people that have done that act physically, but to the people that have anger in their hearts for their brother or their sister. See, what Jesus is doing is he's flipping this on its head. He's illuminating something deeper that goes into the heart of the people so they can't say, yeah, I got that down. That's not me. It's all of us. It's all of us. Underneath the statement that Jesus gives, thou shalt not commit adultery, is a much bigger vision of marriage, a much bigger vision of sexuality, and what it means at the core to be a human. That's really what it comes down to. And Jesus, he doesn't here in this passage fully unpack that vision, and so we won't either, but he does unpack his vision of humanity, marriage, and sexuality later on in Matthew chapter 19. And so even though we're not going to get to that in this series particularly, I want to encourage you to go and read it this week. To go and read Matthew chapter 19, where he roots his understanding of marriage and sexuality in the first 2 chapters of the Bible in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And in short, here is the vision that God has in mind when he created humanity. God created the world. He created it good, right? He created them male and female. And in his image, he created them. There's a Latin phrase that refers to that. It's the imago Dei. It means the image of God. God created the world in a specific way. And by design, in that way, men and women, in the way that he set it up, are distinct, they are different, and they are complementary to one another. And so together, this is God's idea, they together are the best reflection of what we just said, the imago Dei, the image of God. That is God's design and God's plan for the world. And that's not only his plan for the world, but we also see that Jesus affirms that because he believes in the scriptures. Marriage, then, according to the biblical vision, is a covenantal union of the heart, mind, body, and soul between a man and a woman. This was Jesus' understanding, and this was his teaching. And so, incidentally, sex and sexuality is tied to this covenant. It was central to God's design and his vision for marriage and his design and vision for humanity. So when Jesus talks about something like adultery, I want you to understand that he's not talking mostly about not breaking a rule. That's not the heart of what he's getting at here. He's actually talking about something much deeper than that. He's talking about the fracturing of something sacred, a distortion of what it means at the core of who we are to be human. But Jesus doesn't stop with the external act. As I said before, he knows that no one, or at least a good majority of us, probably didn't wake up one morning and casually say to us or say to ourselves, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to destroy my marriage. I'm pretty sure that not many of us have had that thought before, or very few. And so he knows that it's not just about an external act, but it's actually about the heart. Verse 28, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If you were here last week, as I said before, this sounds familiar, right? Like he's comparing the idea of lustful intent with adultery, just like he did with murder and anger. And so he's using these themes to drive out and to draw out an important point. I want to just say this. In my experience and in the world around me and friends and family, I've come to realize that adultery is almost always the final chapter of a much longer story that began in someone's heart a long time ago. This is my experience. And I, over the years, have had a very front row seat to the destruction that can cause in people's lives. I can think of multiple different examples of people whose marriages failed for sure as a result, but even beyond that, the residual effects of all that. There's like these rings that go out, and they keep going out. There's some that I would say, I still feel the effects of that particular failure and that sin to this day. So it's not a small deal that Jesus is addressing something like our humanity through our sexuality. I did a little bit of a word study this week because I thought to myself, we don't really ever use, on a regular basis, we don't really ever use the word lust in everyday vernacular. It's like not part of our normal conversations, if you will. It's kind of one of those words that you sort of hear in church and as you're reading scripture and maybe on a Netflix show or something that kind of idealizes some of these themes. But I want to just break this down a little bit for us as we look at what Jesus is getting at and a couple different versions of the same passage here. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully, that's the NIV's translation. The King James Version, maybe you grew up with this, it says, but I say unto you that whosoever looketh, there we go, on a woman to lust after her. The New Living Translation, which I really love as well, but I say anyone who even looks at a woman with lust, and then the ESV at the bottom there, everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent. I actually think that the ESV gets this most accurate. I think that's so because it's the most explicit about the idea of lust being purpose and choice. Purpose and choice. So when you hear a phrase like lustful intent, you see that there's purposeful choice in that action. Here, I think it's important to realize that Jesus is not talking simply about noticing beauty. I think it's safe to acknowledge that we live in a world that is full of beautiful people, okay? And the reason that is because people are made in the image of God. And so what Jesus is talking about is not noticing beauty that he has created, but what he's talking about here is what happens after that beauty is noticed. After that beauty is noticed. Is there a refocusing of that understanding? Is there a lingering of that notice? Using another person at the furthest it goes to fuel some sort of sexual desire in yourself. That's, I think, what Jesus is getting to when he's talking about lustful intent. You know, what I appreciate about Jesus is that he isn't abstract. In fact, I think he's giving us a very specific example that we're not too unfamiliar with, I would say. And, you know, if you're here today and you're a woman in the room, I'm going to almost go out on a limb here. 9 out of 10, you've probably experienced that kind of stare. If you're a man here in the room, it's very likely that you have given that kind of a stare, and you may have received that kind of a stare as well. But the reality is that you know and I know exactly what Jesus is talking about here. Here we are. Think about this. Here we are, 2,000 plus years later, after the time of Jesus, and we're talking about the same issue that they dealt with at that time. And here's the reality of why we are still dealing with the same sort of issue in our culture. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. It's because this is a matter of the heart. It's not a matter of a generation. This is a matter of the heart. It's not a matter of society. This is tied to the very existence of your humanity. And so lust, as we see, as Jesus kind of draws out here, isn't mere attraction, but it is appropriation. Because lust turns a person almost always into an object and says that you ultimately exist for my pleasure, for my desire. And Jesus says that's not a small thing. It's actually a big deal. I'm gonna ask a question that you might be thinking to yourself right now, especially if you're new to the church community, maybe new to Christianity, or you're just dipping your toe in the water. And it's this question: why is it such a big deal, Justin? Why is the topic of sexuality and desire, and why is it such a big? Why does the church hammer this? You know, and there's so much that can be said across the board. Why do we spend a lot of time focusing on this? Like, is this not like one part of many parts of the Christian story? Why does Jesus set the bar so high? And here's what I want to say in response to the question that you asked. Thank you. It's because sex is not a small deal. Sex is not something to just be brushed off. I know that's sort of what our society has done to this institution of marriage and sex. But when God created, he created human bodies that are gendered human bodies. They're physical human bodies. They are relational human bodies. And he looked at it all, and this is what's amazing. In the story of Genesis, you see him creating, and after I think there's like 7 times that he looks out upon his creation, and he says, it is good, right? And then he gets to, after he creates mankind, gendered, emotional, relational bodies, and says, anybody know? It is very good. There's a distinction that gets made when it comes to the idea of sex and sexuality in marriage. We're working really hard, I would say, in an age-appropriate way in our house right now to communicate with our children that sex is not a bad thing. It's actually a God thing, and desire is not a bad thing. There's an entire book of the Bible that's devoted to celebrating this theme. It's called Song of Songs. And so all that to say, what we're talking about today, this is a powerful thing, right? This is something that is powerful, and I would like to say that it's never neutral. It's sort of like fire. You ever think about fire? Fire is good, right? Generally speaking, fire is great. It heats my home, right? Fire, it brings light into darkness. It creates warmth and beauty. Just this past month, the igniter in our stove went bad, so I had to order an igniter and spend a little bit of time installing a new one. And man, I was never so happy to get fire back in the house. You know, I don't know if you know this, but you just take all those panels off a stove, and it's basically like a big, propane charcoal grill, kind of thing. And as soon as you get the igniter put back in there, and you saw the blue flame come in, I mean, there had to have been a cheer in our house, because it was like, wow, now we can get our stove back, and we can start cooking. So I could go on and on about the reality of the goodness of fire. And I could talk about how great it is, but my question is, what happens when fire escapes its proper environment? Well, it has the power to destroy. As I said before, I've had so many. I feel like maybe it's just because you're in the pastoral world, and you just, again, you get a front row seat to the best and the worst of people's lives. And over 20 years, you just end up seeing a lot of things, good and bad. And I will say that I have seen fire get out of control a lot of times. I've seen it destroy. I've seen it consume at the very worst. And that's all to say that we have to understand this desire works in both ways. Like a fire out of control, misdirected desire has the power to consume you, to destroy you. And here's what I want to say. Jesus loves you too much to minimize that reality. And so when you ask the question, why is it such a big deal? That's why. Because it has the power harnessed to destroy you and to destroy relationships. How many of you have had the experience when you've been friends with two people for a long time, and that relationship doesn't make it? They go two different ways, and all of a sudden you find yourself in the middle of a storm, and you end up, at least in my experience, you always end up picking like the one side, and it's messy, it's hard, it's difficult. This is what Jesus is saying. Jesus has the highest view of this subject, where our culture treats this as casual, transactional, and recreational. Jesus treats it as sacred, covenantal, and attached to the deepest part of our humanity. This is why it's a big deal. Verse 29, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. This is kind of shocking language, as if the heat's not already been turned up from Jesus here. Is he advocating right now for self-mutilation? As you continue reading on, it says, if your hand gets in the way, your arm, cut it off. What's he doing? Well, he says these things to give us an alert, but I want to just point something out here. Jesus did not stop here at external forces, because he knew that even if you tore your eye out, or even if you cut your arm off, or even if you want to use your imagination for how far you want to take that analogy, he knew that the problem is not in those external things. It's in the heart. Jesus is using hyperbole here to say, take this seriously. My kingdom people, my Jesus people, the people that I have given so much of myself for and have paid a ransom for and have set you up to be a different society within a society, telling the world about my goodness. This is how much I care. This is how much I want you to take this seriously. What does that look like in our modern day? What does it look like to gouge your eye out and cut your arm off? Well, maybe for some of us today, it just simply means to remove access, however you want to take that. Maybe it means that you need to change some patterns and behaviors in your life. Maybe today is the day that you realize how important it is to have a community where you can confess sin to. Like, I think a lot of us are just like walking around and doing the church thing, but we have nobody that we could identify as the people that would hear our heart and would know the deepest part of who we are, good and bad. I guarantee you that probably 90% of the room is in that category today. And Jesus says there's more. Because the community of God are meant to be on a pattern and a pathway together. This is not to say that, as I said, that desire is bad or something to be pushed down or repressed, but it is to be lived out in the right and appropriate ways. And you need help with that. I need help with that. Our community needs help with that. Why are the stakes so high? Well, we saw at the very end that Jesus, he refers to hell here at the end of our passage. And that is not to terrify you, but to tell you the truth. Because misdirected desire, left unchecked, Jesus knows will consume you like a fire. It has the ability to hollow out your soul. It destroys marriages. It destroys families. I've seen generations of kids affected by this area of sin in their life. And Jesus says, I've got more for you. I've got freedom for you. I've got a new way of living, a new way of being human. In our day and age today, there's all kinds of outlets for where we run to find misdirected sexual desire. Of course, pornography is an epidemic in our culture. It's become so normalized. I am petrified to have a middle school age son. I am worried every day about what my kids might see and hear that doesn't come from me. We're trying to do our very best to obviously put protections in place, but I just know because of my own experiences in life that day is coming. And Dad, Mom, that day is coming. You know what I'm talking about. We have other outlets that we run to. It's not just about that. I mean, we have avenues of emotional porn in our life and around us. Affairs, we oftentimes we look down the road at the worst things, but we got to know all along that this stuff has been nursed, just like anger. It's been nursed all along. It's been on a trajectory all along. And so affairs and abuse, different expressions, they all come from the same root that has the potential to grow into something more if not taken care of. And Jesus says to you and to me, you were made for more. You were made for more than this. The church is meant to be a place where we're able to talk about this. I can't think of a better place to talk about a subject like this than right now in this context. Because you know why? The whole world is talking about this. They have their own narrative for what this is supposed to look like. And here's Jesus giving it to us on a golden platter of what the vision that he has for his people is supposed to look like and supposed to be. Will we take him up on it? This is the place, the church, where desire can be named, not denied. It's really important to see this as a good thing, but only that it can be misdirected very easily. This is the place where sin can be confessed, not hidden. Want to be the type of community where our stuff can come into the light and where we can find freedom. Healing is possible here because grace is the community that we're in. People get treated here as people, not objects. This is what life in the kingdom is supposed to look like. This is supposed to be what our MO in the world is part of. So I want to pray for us because, even though Jesus gives us some very challenging words today, right? Can we acknowledge that? Challenging. Kind of a hot topic, a little uncomfortable right now. It's okay. Everybody doing all right? It's okay. Jesus has more for you. He has more for you and more for me.